Good evening all, and welcome. Neighbours can be lovely people, and other times, they can be absolutely horrific. Unfortunately tonight, we have neighbours of the horrific variety waiting for you. I also have the pleasure to be joined by Vidith22 today. He is an amazing narrator, and if you enjoy his work, you will find the link in the description and at the end of the video. But for now, it's time to get comfortable, close those blinds, and let the darkness take control. A year ago, my apartment complex decided they wanted to renovate my unit, so I had to move out at the end of my lease. I live in Denver, and rent is pretty ridiculous here. So I started worrying about finding something affordable in my neighborhood, which I love. I posted on the Nextdoor app to see if anyone in my neighborhood knew of any affordable rentals in my area. I immediately got a message from someone named Joe, who said that one of the condos in his complex was going to be up for rent soon, and he knew the owner. He offered to get me in touch with them, and I asked if he could send me pictures of the unit, and he asked if he could text me some pictures his neighbor took, because the chat function on the app is really slow. Now I feel stupid for doing this, but I gave him my phone number. I kid you not, I received a phone call from an unknown number within seconds. I normally don't answer calls from unknown numbers, but I was expecting a call from a number that wasn't saved in my phone, so I answered it. I was completely bewildered when the person said, "Hey, it's Joe. How's your day going?" Huh? It took me by surprise and I didn't know what to say. He started to talk on and on about the phone, about how he works nights and how tired he is and how he takes care of his daughter while his girlfriend works during the day, la 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 la. I finally interrupted and said, "So, about the condo?" He pretty much disregarded that and said, "I don't think my girlfriend would appreciate me talking to you, but I don't have to tell her, right?" I said I have to go and immediately hung up. As soon as I did that, he started texting me. It was really bizarre and alarming. I blocked his number and moments later, he found me on Facebook and sent me a friend request. I'm 32 years old, but it was so disturbing to me that I called my parents to tell them about how unnerved it made me. And the worst part was that on Nextdoor, even if your exact address isn't listed, your complex is. I was pretty certain that I didn't have my address visible on my profile, but it checked. And sure enough, the unit number was public, along with my address. Unable to contact me any other way, he started messaging me again and again on Nextdoor, asking if I wanted to go on a walk with him. You can't block or report people on the app, so I deleted it. One night a month or so later, I had a knock at my door around 10 on a weeknight. I looked at my peephole but couldn't get a good look at the person. He had his head slightly down, and either way, I don't answer the door for anyone I'm not expecting, especially not a random guy at 10 at night. Feeling panicked, I called my neighbor across the hall. She's an older woman, and we look out for each other since we both live alone. I asked her if it looked like he was a delivery guy at the wrong door. She opened her door to get a look at the guy, and that spooked him because he literally ran away. I have no idea if this was the Nextdoor guy or not, but my gut tells me it was. This was a big wake-up call. I always felt like I practiced good online safety, but I didn't even know my address was visible on Nextdoor. I'll never be casual or lazy about privacy settings like that again. And another story. When I was 18, I was still living at home and started dating a guy who was 20 and lived with roommates. I broke up with him after a few months, when I learnt he was getting into coke. He didn't take it all too well. One night a few months later, I was up late studying and I had a test the next day. I shut my light off at around 2 a.m. and as I did so I heard some rustling around outside. Next thing I know, there's a knock on my bedroom window. I was startled and having no idea who was outside, I yelled for my dad. This story is more funny than scary, but my dad then comes running into my room in his underwear with a baseball bat, his hair all messed up. "Who is it?" And the person said, "It's Josh, sir." My dad said, "You aren't dating anymore, go home, Romeo." Then Josh yells, "I just want to talk to you, please come with me." My dad threatened to kick his ass, so he took off. I looked out the window and saw that he sped off in a car with a couple of his friends. I have no idea what his plan was, but he wanted me to go with him. Could have been entirely innocent, but you get that gut feeling when you get it.
I live in the same trailer for most of my life. We moved there after my grandmother died and lived there for about 14 years. I was always picked on by my neighbors, so I didn't ever want to leave the house when people were outside. When I found out we were moving, I was ecstatic. You mean I'll actually be able to go out and get some air without being confronted with people mooning me? Sign me up. We moved about a town over on this long street, so I'd have plenty of space to walk around if I wanted. Seeing how I was new to the place and bored out of my skull, not having everything of mine moved yet, I invited a friend over, and we went walking that street. We see one of the neighbors a few houses down washing his bright red truck. He stopped to make conversation. "Oh, you guys just moved in?" And the sort. Nothing seemed off about the guy. A few weeks pass and I walk that street again. I'm confronted by the same guy. "Hey, you want a job? Pays $20 an hour." No. Considering this is the second time I've ever spoken to this guy, no, I don't want your shady job. Visibly not having any of this, I try to get out of the conversation without too much of a fuss. I figured that would be the end of it, because he probably saw that the guy he met twice was really not comfortable talking to him, and he'd leave me alone. I was wrong. A while later, I passed by his house again. He wasn't inside. I went for a short walk, and when I came back the way I came, there he was, smoking a cigarette out on his front porch. He asked if I thought about his job offer. I said, "No, I'm still thinking about it," to which he started grilling me. "For $20 an hour, what's there to think about?" After clearly not wanting anything to do with this, he threatens to report me. To what? The only thing I've been able to think is it might be unemployment, which, given I'm not on unemployment, I would say they don't care. Winter strikes. It's about 9 p.m. and going stir-crazy inside. I need some air. I don't want to walk all the way down the hill I live on because I'd rather not slip and fall. Reluctantly, I walk my street. When passing by the house, I see him staring out his window. I passed by his house a few more times before getting creeped out and heading to the other side of the street. After walking around for a little while, I see this guy from afar come running from his house, stopping on the street looking for something. I stand in the dark, waiting for him to go back inside. Don't ask me why I did this, because to be perfectly honest, I kick myself for it to this day. I decided to walk that road one more time just to get the rest of the energy out of my system. I would then head back inside and not think about this creepy guy ever again. Passing by his house, he is still staring out his window. After passing by his house, he comes out for a cigarette. I deliberately try to avoid him, and noticing this, he pulls on the screen door to his house. It makes a lot of noise, so I hear the door open. Not being an idiot, I know he did this to make me think he went back inside. I decide I've had enough of this little game. I walk past and just go home. And of course he tries to talk to me about that job. "You could afford shoes that fit if you had that job of mine." I ignore him, after which he swears at me. I've totally stopped walking on that road. However, my mom has seen him pulling up to me when her and I were bringing laundry out to the car. Upon seeing me, he slows to a seeming stop and looks as if he wants to say something. Upon seeing my mom, he decides that isn't a good idea and drives off. I do not plan to walk this road again if I don't have to. His truck is usually gone on the weekdays, so I figure that I'm safe. However, if I ever have to walk that road, as it's a much faster way to get into town, I definitely try to have music blaring through headphones, just so that if he is there, I don't notice him, and I can carry on my day without even thinking about the gigantic creep that lives down the road. So, creepy guy with the job. You can take that job and shove it. Let's not meet again, you weirdo.
The beginning of my junior year in college, I moved into a new house with a really awesome girl named Jess. One day after classes, my friend Meg and I were on the front porch smoking a blunt when this guy walked by. He then went up to my driveway, which was just shared by the house right next door where he lived. He said hi and asked if I knew Jess, as Jess had lived there before I did for a year. So he apparently knew her. I said yeah, she's my roommate. And we made small talk for a bit, and I asked if he wanted a hit of the blunt. He took one and then carried on. After Meg had left, I was still on the porch just finishing up some classwork when that neighbor came out of his house and said hi again. He walked over to my porch and came up the stairs. I didn't think too much of it because he was really chill earlier. He went on to ask me about relationship advice, but all kinds of weird stuff. There's this girl I'm talking to, but she's also sending nudes and hooking up with other guys. Why won't she do that stuff for me? I tried in the nicest way to explain that maybe she's not into him. He then asked me if I would hook up with someone right after meeting them if I found them attractive. I definitely didn't want to hook up, and I didn't find him attractive, but I said that also in the nicest way possible. He kept calling me beautiful and one of the most sexiest girls he's ever met, and the conversation got awkward, so I excused myself inside and said I'd see him later. Later that night, I'd just gotten back from hanging out with a friend. She dropped me off as she drove away, and I was opening my door when my neighbor came swiftly out of his, almost like he was waiting for me. He ran over to my house and posted himself up against my house and asked me if I wanted to hang. I declined, saying I still had classwork I needed to finish before bed. But he was eager. We can do it together, then maybe cuddle? I declined, and again, he eventually gave up and was asking me more suggestive questions about my preferences and if I would hook up with him. I kept deflecting and trying to leave. He eventually asked for a hug, to which I also declined, but he didn't give that one up. He ended up grabbing me and pulling me quite tightly, squeezing me, and that left me feeling sick to my stomach. I quickly pulled away fast and ran back into the house. I locked the door and some time goes by, and I'm cooking in my kitchen when I heard a knock on the front door. None of my friends were coming over, so I'm clueless as to who it could be. I peeked around the corner and saw my neighbor, and my stomach sank a little. Instead of answering the door, I just snuck myself into the bathroom and hid for a second, hoping he'd think I'd fallen asleep. Another 3 knocks come, and then another. Finally, there's silence. Then all of a sudden, he calls out my name through the open window next to my door. Amy, hello? I know you're home. I just have a few questions, Amy. At this point, I was sick. I messaged my friend Corey, who lived in the fraternity house just right down the street from me, to quickly run over here and act like he's coming to hang out. Corey came and met the neighbor at the doorstep. I overheard the neighbor's conversation, which consisted of, "Are you her boyfriend? She told me she was doing homework tonight. Now she's having friends over? Do you think she may like me? Can you tell me more about her?" Corey did an awesome job deflecting, and I opened the door to get him inside as quick as I could. The neighbor asked me to come outside real quick. I did, only because I felt safer with Corey just behind the door. He ended up asking almost the same questions from before and ended the conversation with, "Can I have a hug?" I said I'll see you later and got back into the house. The next day just returned from her boyfriend's, and I told her all about our creepy ass neighbor. She surprisingly knew all about him and his ways. He had pretty much waited outside for her numerous times like he did for me, watched her run up and down the street and try to hang out with her and touch her as well. Jess eventually told her boyfriend about my encounters with our neighbor, and he went over to have a word with him. I'm not sure what he said, but the neighbor never made eye contact with me again. I'm afraid that if I didn't speak up and tell Jess, things would have gotten worse very quickly. I know a lot of people have had far worse situations than me, but this always sends a chill down my spine whenever I think about it. I know it could have gotten a lot worse.
This goes back to the mid-90s, I would say around 1995. My grandma, already a widow, lived alone in her house in a small village surrounded by hills and small mountains. As it happens, my grandma's house was on the slope of a mountain, besides a small, partially paved road, hardly wide enough for one car. This road was de facto used for my parents and uncles to drive their cars up to the house when visiting, and they would park in the road itself as there was no traffic whatsoever. So me, my sister, and our 3 cousins took advantage of the paved parts of the road to play football over there, as we would spend almost 2 months every summer at my grandma's. Those vacations were the highlight of the year. Well, across the road from my grandma's, there was another house whose occupant, an elderly man who lived alone, was a bit eccentric. His name was Pepe. Pepe would only leave the house to go shopping and take care of his garden. Was a bit of a loner, and my grandma, who among us was the only one who ever had a conversation with, had a polite but distant approach towards him. All this after 30 years living in front of each other, separated by no more than 10 meters. Hey, privacy's always to be respected. Pepe led quite a monk life that was threatened only by the football naughty kids. In the beginning, he just stared at us from one of the windows as we would play. As the kids we were, this was actually quite comical, and we'd look at each other and roll our eyes as in, oh, this weirdo again, stalking us from the window. He would stay there for a long time as we played ball, more than hours sometimes, with his poker face on. Never said a word to us. I do recall sometimes we would wave at him so he would feel uncomfortable for displaying such a weird behavior, but he never waved back, and never left until we stopped playing ball. He was clearly irritated, and our assumption, of course, was that the ball was the problem. The situation repeated itself every day for around 2 or 3 weeks, and my grandma grew uncomfortable with us playing ball, so she repeatedly told us not to. But kids being kids, and any time my grandma was in the garden of the back or collecting apples from a nearby field of hers, we wanted football. That was a mistake. One evening we were there doing our thing, and Pepe had been staring at us for 20 minutes or so from his window, when suddenly he disappeared. Now that was new. Not a minute passes and Pepe shows up on his massive porch, oriented towards my grandma's, where he had some firewood and a bunch of long sticks. He had a small knife in his hand, but we didn't notice. The situation is still funny for us because he's there looking super upset, staring at us dressed with his usual apron and wooden shoes. So we once more looked at each other, rolled our eyes up, and contained our laughs as the football games carried on. Pepe grabs one of the long sticks and starts to sharpen it as it was a spear. By this point, I remember our faces started to change, but I guess our feeling was he was just trying to intimidate us, and bottom line, we were not doing anything illegal by playing ball in public property. As we the kids had discussed among us several times that he was being weird on purpose to scare us, none stopped playing. And then it happened. He left the porch and with his super wooden shoes started to chase us with the spear pointing up front, as if he was a medieval knight in a tournament but without a horse. The crew and I ran for our lives to my grandma's and locked the door completely in shock as my grandma came inside from the backyard after hearing our screams. As we told her what had happened, Pepe was still outside the house screaming he would set it on fire with all of us inside. My grandma called 112, and in the meantime, my father, who had gone for a jog, arrives at the house to find the neighbor screaming like he was possessed with a spear in his hand, and this enrages him. Now we are on the top floor of my grandma's, watching my father and Pepe screaming at each other, and eventually Pepe drops the spear. The police arrive and file a report, then go and talk to Pepe for a while. As one of the policemen told us later, Pepe wanted to sue us for playing ball in the street by his house. and thus threatening his property with damage. It seems like police warned Pepe he wouldn't sleep at his place if they ever had to come back, but after he threatened to burn my grandma's house with us all inside, no one slept that night. We never again played ball around there. And a couple of years later, Pepe left the house to live with a relative across the country, as my grandma would find out later.
This happened to me in March of 2020, right before the pandemic. I had recently moved to a new apartment complex alone, as I was having relationship issues, but nothing I care to get into. When I first moved into the building, I mostly kept to myself, and the people I met were pretty friendly and neighborly. Previously to settling into my new home, I took a trip back home and accidentally left my building's keys at my aunt's over 4 hours away. She agreed to mail them, and this had me chasing down the mailman daily to catch my package. There was an older gentleman that I also said hello to here and there. Nothing beyond a quick hello or wave. So one day when I was downstairs waiting to meet the postal lady, this gentleman is down there and he says hello to me with a clear accent, and I say hello back. He starts to make small talk and I oblige, as I've always been good with older people. So this next part is stupid of me, but I guess I was just naive. The old man asks to kiss my hand. Weirded out, I assume it's some kind of cultural thing, and I extend my hand, which was a big mistake. This guy was old enough to be my grandfather, then kisses my forehead and cheek in a matter of seconds. As I push him off, he asks me to come up to his apartment, and I firmly decline, then rush out the main door as the postal worker was coming up. The creepy old man yells after me that he loves me, and I just felt so dirty. My boyfriend came to stay with me shortly after, as when I reported it to my landlords, they told me next time it happens to tell him I'm not interested and call the cops. Thanks, guys. Thankfully, I haven't seen him again, and I really don't want to.
I moved to a small Midwest American town with my boyfriend and 2 dogs last June for my doctoral internship year. It was an adjustment after living in a southern beach town, as well as a major city before that. Our living space is one of the factors that has made the move a positive experience. We're on one side of a twinplex that sits on 2 acres, with some trees around it. Our landlord is a retired man in his 60s, kind and gets stuff done quickly. There's an awesome single mom and her kids on the other side of the twinplex. The family is wonderful. However, this story isn't about them. It's about the man next door. I got a weird vibe from him the first time I met him. Not a knee-jerk reaction or anything, just a sort of question mark hovering above his head. Like drawing a blanket in lieu of overt negative interactions, my boyfriend and I have been your typical level of neighborhood friendly. We gave the wave here and there and have no active grudge against him. Although my boyfriend doesn't have the same instinct about the man, he trusts mine. It's nothing I can point to, which, as we all know, means nothing. I'm thrown off by this man. It doesn't keep me up at night, and it's not something I ruminate on, but it's idling in the back of my mind every time I take the dogs in our large backyard in view of our home. I've been thinking back to the very few interactions I've had with this man, which I can count on one hand. The first interaction we ever had was due to a dog fight. In fall 2019, a big male dog with no collar showed up on our property and approached my big dog. The dog wasn't displaying a threatening posture, he was only curious. Unfortunately, my usually mushy-gushy snuggle-bean boxer mix got attacked badly a few years ago by another dog, and he's got little doggy trauma now. Anytime he sees a male dog his size or larger, he gets hypervigilant. He misinterprets any wrong move as ready to attack, and attacks first. So, Big Dog didn't take kindly to this unidentified dog fella. He responded like you'd expect and went after him. I saw two men standing about 50 yards away, near the house in the yard next door. I assumed the uncollared dog belonged to one of them, and called out for them to help break it up and retrieve their dog. The two men ran over and broke it up. Meanwhile, I'm standing there hitting the dogs with my dog's leash, trying to stop them, vicious snarling and all, which I am 100% sure was as dumb-looking as it was ineffective. The other dog ran off. So there I was, sobbing, thanking both of the men for breaking it up. It turned out it wasn't their dog after all. The neighbor said he'd seen the dog around before and believes he tends to go out, and he thinks he knows where the dog lives. They were kind and reassured me my dog was in the right, in protective mode, and the other dog running up on the property was easily interpreted as a threat to him. The conversation was without incident. I thanked them and brought Big Dog back inside. Another interaction we had a few months ago, when the neighbor was in his yard and I was taking out Big Dog and Small Dog. Big Dog is well trained and can be off-leash in appropriate areas, no problem. My neighbor said hello and made conversation about how he's never sure if he's able to pet my dog because he always barks at him from our window. I assured him Big Dog is extremely friendly and not to worry. I also made an irritating mental note that the neighbor inquired about Big Dog's threat level, and I told him he's zero threat at all. I don't know about you all, but my automatic reaction is to calm situations, make others comfortable, etc. And I've got a very high tolerance for odd behaviors. Overlooking odd behaviors is detrimental in these kinds of situations. A learning moment for the next time, I guess. Aside from this, there was one time when we briefly spoke about how deer came through our backyards, and he pulled out food from them and the other critters in a few feeders. I see him in his backyard sometimes, doing what I assume is normal yard stuff and critter feeding. I don't remember any other instances distinctly. This brings us to today. All morning and afternoon, I've been working on a scrapbooking project for my friend's 30th birthday. The dogs are chilling by our sliding door that overlooks the back deck and large backyard trees. My hot glue and I are minding our own business when all of a sudden, Big Dog started growling and Small Dog started barking. Regular barks are usually squirrel or chipmunk alerts, but growls are for threats. I looked up and followed their gaze. There, in the trees on the border of our backyard, was my neighbor. He was barefoot and dressed in khaki shorts and a black t-shirt. He was fussing around near the ground in the middle of the tree-lined area that separates our expanses of unfenced yards. I figured he was refilling one of the feeders for the animals or something, but I kept watching because of the back of my head question mark on this guy. And then he moved. He was already flirting with the property line where he was initially standing. Several paces into our property, in fuller view of our back deck and sliding door. I watched silently. Because I'm an anxious gal, I do double-check my alert reactions to make sure I'm keeping my thought process relatively rational. I watched like this for a few seconds until he stopped moving. He halted on a patch of land a few paces beyond the property line, obscured by pine tree branches. All I could see was hips down. His knees were pointed at my window. While our yards are unfenced, there's an unspoken boundary neighbors don't cross here. It's a sloppy-looking star shape. There's a house at each point, and the expansive backyards all meld, converging into the center lawn. He had no business being in our area of the yard. There's nothing else to look at. It's our twinplex, and it's our side of the home, which begs the question, exactly what are you doing, sir? Get your knees out of my trees. The best excuse I can come up with is that he was wistfully surveying his home and yard with the pride of a man who mows it himself. But that's a long shot. Doing anything resembling looking at his own home or yard would have required him to rotate his body more than 70 degrees to his left. I stood up in the middle of the room and approached the window so he could see me looking out, directly at him. Keeping him in my peripheral, I glanced around briefly to find my phone so I could take his picture, which I am happy for him to see me doing in broad daylight. I couldn't find it though, so I just watched. My body was stable, but I noticed my bones started shaking a little. I think I would have the behind-the-scenes brain acknowledgement that there was no other explanation for him to have been postured like that, facing towards me. After about 30 seconds, he casually walked back up to his side of the property and made what looked to me like a half-effort attempt to keep like he was just picking a few things off one of the grounds, like you do to clear a few pieces of litter. He paused in his yard, still obscured by the trees from the hips down. He was stationary. I walked to our bedroom to get a closer view out of our partially drawn blinds. In the 5 seconds it took to walk from the main room to our bedroom, he disappeared. I immediately called my boyfriend at work to let him know what's up. Even he agreed it was weird, and he's the polar opposite of dramatic. I walked out on my back deck, in what would have been a full view if he had still been outside, and knocked on my neighbor's sliding glass door overlooking the deck. I told her what I noticed, and she agreed it was weird, and we're on the lookout now. We both went outside and blatantly stood where he was standing to get a look at the view. It was a clear shot to our window. I noticed it was dark inside my home, so even though I was standing in plain sight and staring at him, he likely wouldn't have seen it. I posted 2 pictures to give a clearer idea of the scene. From my perspective, look above the A in the grad banner. That's my neighbor standing in the same place he did. From his perspective, his house is out of frame to the left of the photo, beyond my car. I texted my landlord next, and he doesn't know the man at all. My landlord's mother-in-law lived in this space before us, and she hadn't mentioned anything. He was quick and responsive and encouraged me to call our sheriff's office. I touched base with my boyfriend again, too. I asked him about Big Dog's reaction to the neighbor, just to be sure, and that's when I found out I was wrong. Apparently, my boyfriend noticed Big Dog growls at this neighbor, hair up every time he sees him. No one else, only him. As far as I'm concerned, 3 strikes, you're out. My weird feeling, my dog repeatedly growling, and knees in my trees. I have my eyeballs trained straight on you.
When I was 11, I lived in a pretty bad neighborhood. To paint a picture, there were very common street races, gunfights, and fight clubs around. All this in mind, I hated being home alone. My parents, knowing this, allowed me to have a friend over whenever they would be out late to keep me calm, as I have some heavy anxiety. I had a neighbor who was a boy around my age, perhaps just a little bit older. When I went outside to play with or walk my dog, he would talk to me, so he wasn't a complete stranger. One day my parents were going out on a date night and would be out until at least 2 to 3 a.m. So they said I could have a sleepover with my best friend. All was going well and we were playing some video games in the living room when suddenly around midnight my neighbor started crawling through my dining room window. As someone who has heavy anxiety, I was prepared for such a situation and had a weapon with me and instructed my best friend to get my dog since he is fiercely protective. I wasn't scared of this kid. I've seen him fight and figured I could take him if I needed to with all my precautions in place. The conversation went as such. What the hell? Why are you crawling through my window? What do you want? Whoa, relax. I just wanted to hang with you and your friend. I could hear you laughing from my house on Mortis Inn. You're not supposed to be here. My mum and dad will get mad. I just want to hang out for a little bit, get some food, play some games, come on. Then he refused to leave, and I don't remember most of what he said. I didn't feel threatened and decided to let him stay since he wouldn't take no for an answer. He stole a good amount of my food too. One thing I noticed is that he was avoiding the windows but didn't make it obvious, so I tried not to think about it since I was scared. He went home after about an hour, and my friend and I didn't think much of it. The next morning I was in the front yard doing who knows what, when I see the kid getting his ass beat and screamed at by his older sister. I laughed and asked what he did, and she told me something that made my blood freeze. She told me that he was hiding from the cops, as he beat some kids so bad he sent them to the hospital and damaged some property at school, where the fight took place. I avoided that house and those kids as much as possible, and we moved away shortly after.
So it's taken me a while to decide to write all these down because this story has multiple parts that may or may not be connected. It might be a long one, and a little anticlimactic as it's not as creepy or traumatic as some other stories. But it's taken weeks for me to get a good night's sleep since Ronald Simmons came banging on my door. Here's the setup. I live on a little dirt road in southern Ohio, which sounds rural and farmy, but it sits right up against a complex of subsidized apartments and a major thoroughfare for the area. It's a weird mix of transients and long-time residents, young families and lone elderly people. One home might be meticulously kept and maintained, but then the neighbor might have a jet ski in the yard and a tree wrapped in chicken wire as a makeshift cage for their pet parrot. Not a random example. It's a real thing. I've lived here for nearly 10 years, and for more than 9 of those years, it's just been my daughter and I. She's 10 now, but I still don't like to let her play in the yard alone, and I'm obsessive about keeping our doors closed and deadbolted at all times, even when we're just chilling at home. I keep to myself and don't ask questions or cause problems. I'm an introvert whose primary goal in life is to leave and to be left alone. And then Tom moved in. So imagine that the neighborhood is kind of laid out like a 4-rung ladder. I live on the 3rd rung, and going left or right takes you to a road that leads you to that aforementioned main thoroughfare and exits the neighborhood. Tom moved into a house near one of those exit roads, just a few houses down from me, on the opposite side of the street, which I was wholly unaware of until I was out in my yard one day a few years ago, and a passing car slowed and the window rolled down. Now, I've had sketchy experiences with scammers and solicitors in the neighborhood before. There's a whole other story about a group that tried to convince me to get in their car and take money out of an ATM for them, so I'm highly skeptical and suspicious of any strangers that want to just stop for a chat. Plus, I've never seen this guy before. Heavy set, salt and pepper hair, heavy-lidded eyes, probably in his 50s, at least. I'm 26 at the time, so he has to be around twice my age. So Tom slows the car and rolls down the passenger window. He says something, but I can't hear him, so I take a hesitant step closer to the vehicle, hoping he's just asking for directions. "Hey girl," he says, and all my hackles immediately go up at the positively greasy way he says the word girl. "I'm Tom. Just moved in down the street there." "Oh," I tell him, off my footing. "Okay." "What's your name, honey?" Now, calling me honey is usually a great way to royally tick me off, but there was something about him, even in those first few moments, that set off alarm bells. Sometimes it's not a big deal to tell a creep to back off, but other times there's a voice that goes, "This one is a time bomb. Do not set him off." So I tell him my name in the hope that he's just being neighborly because, hey, maybe he's a nice grandpa who hadn't gotten the memo about using girl and honey. It's Southern Appalachia. He wouldn't be the only one. But then he asks, "You got a boyfriend?" I think every woman probably has that little oh god moment every time this question gets asked by a random stranger, and I'm so taken aback and still trying to feel out the interaction that I just say something in the negative, because it's true. I don't have a boyfriend. For a good reason. I'm gay. But at this point in my life, that's still very private information, and I don't feel obligated or inclined to provide that detail to him. "You should let me take you out sometime. he says with that Appalachian twang. We could have a few beers. At this point, all of my skin is crawling, and I decline as politely as I can. He persists, and the interaction feels like it takes a lifetime. But I'm guessing it was about 10 or 15 minutes before I successfully inched my way back to my front door and make an excuse to go back inside. I was hoping that would be the last time I would have to talk to Tom. But, of course, it wasn't. For weeks, it seemed like every time I stepped outside, there was Tom in his car, slowing down to talk to me about this or that, but mostly trying to convince me to go out with him. When are we gonna go out to dinner? I always said no as politely as I could. It was annoying and stressful, but manageable. Then it escalated. I'm sitting at home one day and there's a knock at my door. I don't have a peephole or any means of knowing who's at my door without sticking my whole head in my front window. So, mostly, I just don't answer the door unless I'm expecting someone. If it's someone I know, they'll call me on my phone or announce themselves at the door. So I just let the knocking go. But then my doorbell rings, and then there's more knocking, and even more knocking. So finally I'm thinking, maybe the neighbor's house is on fire or something. I don't know. I answer the door, and of course, it's Tom. "Hey girl," he said with a slick, ominous grin that never reaches his eyes. "How you doing?" I want to tell him to go screw himself, but no more than ever, my instincts are telling me not to make him angry. He's clearly not afraid to push a boundary, and he lives basically just 2 or 3 houses down. All I can imagine is him going home and stewing over my insults, my rejection, and then only having to walk like 2 minutes to get back at me. So I made the conversation as short as possible, decline all his advances as politely as possible, and deadbolt my door as quickly as possible once he's gone. He starts coming around at least once a day, and I stop answering the door. He persists with his knocking, pounding loudly and angrily on the door when I won't answer. But I'm not going to voluntarily engage with this man in any way. One day, I'm sitting on my living room floor, working on something, and the knocking starts. I ignore it. It gets more insistent and angry. He calls my name, but he can't prove I'm home, so screw him. And then, he tries the handle of my door. I always deadbolt the door, thank God, but the actual door handle is usually unlocked, so I was sitting right there, not 3 feet from the door, when I saw and heard it turn violently. If it hadn't been deadbolted, he would have walked right in and found me sitting in the floor. I probably should have called the cops, but I have never called the cops on anyone before, so it seemed so extreme. He went away shortly after, and I just let it go. So stupid. On another day, I'm out mowing my lawn, headphones in. When I look up, here comes Tom. I cannot get away from this man, and it's starting to make me feel absolutely trapped. Of course, he wants to talk, and because I'm a non-confrontational Mormon at that time, I stop mowing and pull out my headphones. He tells me he can help me with the mowing. A pretty girl like me shouldn't have to mow her own yard. All I gotta do is come down and ask help. He tells me how he's helped out Eric all the time. Eric lives 2 houses down from me, almost directly across from Tom, and Eric is a constant, habitual public drinker. He doesn't bother anyone, just staggers around his yard, hangs out on the couch in his driveway, and feeds the stray cats, which is problematic because it means we have a booming population of feral, half-mad cats running amok. But I feel for him. I'm an animal person. I get it. I've seen Tom and Eric together sometimes, and I guess they're friends. Tom says he mows Eric's grass, and he can mow mine too, but I've never seen Tom mow anything. And besides, Jesus, man, just leave me alone. He goes on to say that he sees me driving by his house sometimes. Yeah, there's only 2 ways off this street, and the shorter route is past his house. So I have, by default, driven past his house. But I won't anymore. Never again. I will take the long way if it kills me. I decline and decline and decline. I start avoiding being outside at all costs. I usher my daughter as quickly as I can to and from the car. I carry groceries in as quickly as possible. Even then, he can see me from his house. And as I'm rushing towards the door, I will sometimes hear a loud, low wolf whistle, and will look up to see Tom waving at me. I usually pretend I don't see or hear him and deadbolt the door as quickly as I can. At some point in the following days and weeks, I order pizza. When there's a knock at the door, I answer it instantly. For a bewildering second, I cannot figure out why my pizza man is shirtless. But it's not my pizza man. It's Tom, and his enormous, bare beer gut. He's swaying a little, and he leans in against my door frame. He pushes a piece of paper into my hand and explains that it's his phone number. He asks again if I've got a boyfriend yet. At this point, I'm desperate and feel like it's a bad idea to just blurt out, "I'm a lesbian, Tom." For one, I feel like this won't deter him. In fact, I feel like it might just irritate him and make me a target for some homophobic remarks. In fact, it might make me a target for the whole neighborhood. Which sounds extreme, but the first year I lived there, a guy was beaten to death just up the street. He wasn't gay, and it's a long story, but I always stayed aware that violence wasn't an impossibility. Plus, I don't have a girlfriend either. It's just me and my daughter at the time, and I just need this jerk to leave me alone. I've never met someone who so completely put me on edge. I kept thinking how easy it would be for him to just push past me into the house. I could see him doing it. In my head, there was this constant feeling that he was just on the verge of moving or pouncing. So I just lie to him and say that, yes, I have a boyfriend and we're very happy. Thank you. So much hetero bliss. He grins that dark, greasy grin and he says, "I ain't seen no man around here." He's watching me in my house, watching who comes and goes. This and the fact that he's actually trying to challenge my lie makes my blood go cold. Like it's a game to him. Because he doesn't say it angrily. He says it like it's cute. Like he's caught me against a wall. Like I'm prey. I mean, I'm not defenseless. Even as I'm imagining him pushing his way into the house, I'm also imagining what I could use as a weapon, planning to go straight for his eyes, his nose, and the groin. I wouldn't go down without a fight, that's for sure, but I make up something stupid, like how my pretend boyfriend is in the military and he's away right now, but we're very happy and no, I don't want to have any of the beer you're carrying with you for some reason. He launches into a litany of questions about my pretend soldier boyfriend. How many trucks does he have? Is he good looking? Do I think Tom is good looking? Does he take care of me the way Tom could take care of me? Is Tom good looking? Tom has 2 trucks, you know. He could take care of me. Is my boyfriend a black guy? The last question shuts me down entirely, and somehow makes me both more scared and more enraged. I already knew he's a creep, but now he's a racist creep. The guy just keeps getting worse and worse. I rebuke him again and tell him I have to go. He says, "Well, what your boyfriend don't know won't hurt him," and make him leave. He comes around periodically for a few more years, leaves me some gifts at my door at some point. An old doll and some kind of toys from his garage. I think that they were for my daughter, but I just threw them away. It seemed to go on forever, and I debated calling the cops. I keep thinking that he's just right down the road, and if I call the cops, it's going to become a whole thing. It might escalate more. What are the cops going to do? They can't be there every day, and he hasn't even done anything criminal yet. I don't have a leg to stand on. But eventually, gradually, he leaves me alone. Thank God. I think he got a girlfriend, maybe. I don't know. The whole thing has taken place over the last 4 or 5 years, but the last several months, maybe 12 or 18 months or so, have been very quiet. and I could only assume he'd moved on or away or gotten the message or all of the above. I barely even see him. Cut to about 3 weeks ago. I'm sitting on my couch late in the evening, around 10 o'clock, when I hear noise out on my sidewalk. I pause and listen, and then someone turns my doorknob. It's deadbolted, like always, thankfully. I'm alarmed now, and the banging on my door starts. I can't see who it is, but I know I'm not expecting visitors. The banging turns frantic, urgent, but I wait. More knocking and knocking and knocking. I think maybe it's my parents. Maybe something's happened to my dad. He has a history of heart problems. But why wouldn't they call? Why wouldn't they, right now, just call out and announce who they are? And then I hear a low male voice say, "Man, screw this chick." Oh no. More knocking and turning of my doorknob, knocking even on my window now, the one just beside the door. I'm scared now, but I also know for sure that I don't know who it is, and I'm not opening that door. It also made me kind of mad, like, screw me? Screw you, man. Coming up on my sidewalk and banging on my door while I'm trying to play some Animal Crossing. So I go to the door and shout through it, demanding to know who's there. He calls back. "Nicky, it's me, Reynolds Simmons. I got Eric's beer. Let me in." Okay, my name is not Nicky. I don't even know a Nicky, let alone a Reynolds Simmons. And Eric lives 2 more houses down. Clearly, he just has the wrong house, and the situation should be easy to clear up. "I don't know who you are," I tell him through the door. "You have the wrong house. You need to go." But he just bangs on the door some more, insists he doesn't have the wrong house. "Come on, Nicky, stop messing around and just open the door. It's me, Reynolds Simmons. I have Eric's beer." He yells at me, tries the door again, bangs on the window in an absolute frenzy. "My name isn't Nicky," I yell back. "You have the wrong house. You need to back off or I'll call the cops." He just keeps shouting and banging, calling me by the wrong name, begging me to just open the door. And he keeps repeating his name, his whole name, Ronald Simmons. "It's me. It's Ronald Simmons. I have Eric's beer. Open the door. Just open the door. It's Ronald Simmons." We go back and forth what feels like an eternity, but probably was only 10 minutes or less. By this time, my kid has heard the commotion and is scared, and I'm not sure if he's going to escalate, but he definitely isn't listening to me, and doesn't seem to be going away. I'm freaked out by how he keeps begging me to just open the door, like maybe he doesn't have the wrong house at all, and is just trying to get me to come outside. Tom also comes to mind, because he and Eric, they're friends. So even though I don't want to, I call the cops. I tell Ronald Simmons I've called the cops, and everything goes quiet for a moment. I think maybe there was enough to make him go away. I explain to the operator what's happening, and they instantly dispatch someone. The operator asks if the man is still there, right as Ronald Simmons begins banging on the door and windows again. "Yes, he's still here. I think he's confused, but he won't leave." "No, I don't know him. His name is Ronald Simmons. No, I don't know what he looks like. I can't see him. No, I'm not going to put my face in the window. He's still hitting the window and the door. You need me to look? To get a description? Oh no." So I pull away the curtain, then lift away the heavy, difficult Venetian blinds. But it's pitch dark, and my porch light doesn't work. All I can see is a bicycle ditched on my front sidewalk. I hear a woman shouting, and it's difficult to make out, but it sounds like she's yelling at Ronald Simmons, telling him that he's got the wrong house. I think it might be one of my immediate neighbors, but I'm not sure. It doesn't stop him. He tells her to back off and keeps yelling at me. It feels like a lifetime passes, and the awareness that someone, some intruder, is just one wall away is overwhelmingly surreal. I can hear him pacing up and down the sidewalk, talking to me and himself. It feels like maybe he's searching for an entry point, but I can't tell for sure. All I can do is listen. I explain everything to the operator as it's happening, and it really doesn't take very long for the flashing lights to appear on my street. I hear officers calling out to Ronald Simmons, and then an exchange of dialogue, but I'm still not opening that door. It's hard to make out all the words, but I distinctly hear an officer say, "So, why are you out here bothering this nice lady?" Finally, someone knocks and announces that he's one of the police officers. When I finally open the door, the said officer asks a few questions. Did he actually try to break into the house? No, but he kept trying my door like a maniac. He was looking for Eric's house down the street. Yeah, I know, he wouldn't stop saying it. I tried to tell him that he had the wrong house. Is this your bike? No. Okay, we'll make sure he leaves with it. You have a nice night now. I have no idea what happened from there. No idea if they just took him to Eric's house or what. I saw him briefly standing in the headlights of the cop car on the road, talking to another officer. Skinny, hair buzzed so short as to be non-existent, clothes a little too big. I've never seen him before in my life. I assume they didn't arrest him. I guess he hadn't really done anything criminal, but it still took hours for my heart rate to slow down and the adrenaline to wear off. I didn't sleep, just waiting for him to come back or for something else to happen. In the morning, my daughter and I went outside and found that one of our planter boxes on the porch had been demolished. It was kind of old anyway, and probably just got stepped on in the scuffle. I left it alone because it felt weird to touch anything to do with Ronald Simmons. It took several more days for me to finally gather up the scraps and throw it away. It's been 3 full weeks, and yesterday my daughter says, "Mom, don't we hide our spare key under that box?" When she told me that, my soul left my body. She was right. Our old hiding spot had been really high, and it was very hard to access, so the last time we'd used it, I'd just tucked it under that planter and forgotten to move it again. But when I cleaned the box up, I never saw it. I checked the shrubs and soil nearby. I checked the entire porch and stoop area. I checked and checked, but I couldn't find it anywhere. Now, maybe it just got thrown away with the box. Maybe it's just in the shrubs or the grass or something, and I just couldn't find it. Maybe. But I changed the locks that exact day, just in case. To beat it all, after a long period of nothing, I was going out to my car one day this week and heard a loud, low wolf whistle. It's Tom, waving at me from up the street. I pretended I didn't see him and got into my car. There's some other unsettling things going on that are kind of their own story, like the teenage kid who lives behind me who keeps throwing random toys and household items into my yard from his second-story apartment window. There's also the 2 times this past month that I've been woken up by what I'm fairly certain was someone tapping on my bedroom window in the small, dark hours of the morning. But Ronald Simmons really freaked me out, and has left me in a constant state of vigilance. Living basically alone lends a certain amount of nighttime paranoia, but now I'm always wildly fluctuating between 30 and 90% certain that someone is in my house, or just outside my house, or both. And it doesn't help that it seems like Tom, who still lives just down the street, might possibly have some involvement. Or maybe Ronald Simmons was just a random drunk, high, confused guy, and I'm blowing everything out of proportion. Either way, for the love of God, Ronald Simmons and Tom from down the street, let's not meet again.
Just for some context, my bedroom window is in the back of my house, and I can see the next door neighbor's back door. He is a dealer. All the windows in the back of his house and from his living room window can see directly to my bedroom window. Great. He's watched me grow up since we've lived next to him my whole life. And he also has a garbage bag covering the downstairs door window 99% of the time. This all started at the beginning of the month, as far as I know, when I noticed he left his downstairs light on, and there was a sign that said, "Can I see you?" with a big smiley face. I thought it was kind of weird and laughed it off. Then last night at 4 a.m, I woke up and opened my window to get some air, and I saw him downstairs with the light on again, and a sign that said, "Let me have you." Now this really freaked me out, because I'll be 18 in 4 months and I'm still a minor, whereas this guy's in his 50s or something. I took a picture and I showed my mum, who thought it was disgusting and creepy, and I just thought that was that. Now tonight, once again, I opened my window because my room is small, so it gets really hot, and he once again swapped the sign to say, "I'll be good," and I checked through all the other windows that we can see his house in, and he has it so that only I can see it from my room. To say the least, I had a full-on anxiety attack and got my mum. She doesn't know what to do since he's a dealer, and he obviously knows people that could make our lives hell if we call the cops. I'm really stuck in a weird place right now, and I don't know what to do.
I've been a member of this community from close to the beginning, and I know there are a lot of folks on here who have purchased cameras for their doors and homes. I'm going to give a quick overview of my situation and would welcome any advice on how to catch this dude and get him out. One morning, about 1.5 years ago, I left our apartment and noticed there was some weird, crumbly substance strewn across our door and down the hall. It was especially piled up to the left of our door where the hall ends. Upon close inspection, I realized it was that wood pulp type cat litter used. And at the far end of the hall, there was one tiny, crusty cat turd. What could have happened? No one around us has a cat. My husband was out of town at the time, and I told the housekeeper about it, and he said he'd have cleaned it up. The cleaning ladies cleared away most of it, about one big scoop worth, and a little bit remains between the carpet and the wall. It was one of those things I always meant to take care of, and never got around to, so it was a little reminder of that weird moment. A lot of time went by after that first incident, about 10 months or so. Then, one day, my dog with the most sensitive nose was spending a lot of time near the front door. He kept pushing his nose against the bottom to smell the air outside. I just thought he was being weird. Later, when I opened the door to leave, there was some very strange substance on the doormat and on the carpet around it, as well as down the hall. It had bits of foil and something white and doughy, and something crumbly and brown. It had a manic, weird feeling of disarray, like it was shredded and strewn about. I was running late, so I called out to my husband, and he came out to deal with it. He never bothered to tell me what it had been, and I found out just recently that it had been a burrito. My thought at the time, and about recently when I found out it was a burrito, was that a homeless person or drunk friend of a neighbor from a different floor had been looking for a quiet place to hang out and chose our hallway. It seemed weird and yet also just like, well, whatever. You live in a city. There were some people on the first floor who had a lot of parties, so maybe it was one of their friends who had come up here. Again, I don't give it a lot of thought. We live on the 4th floor, and around the time we moved in, another couple moved in as well, onto the 2nd floor. It took a while for me to figure out that they were the source of these crazy, screaming fights we would hear. The first time, I only heard the woman, though I didn't know who it was or where it was coming from. She sounded hysterical. Huge, deep, gravelly yelling, followed by wailing screams soaked with adrenaline. About 4 screaming fits in a row that I couldn't completely make out, but they echoed around the courtyard. I wasn't sure if it was someone on the street or in a different building. I assumed it was a homeless person who didn't have meds they needed. A few minutes after that first time, I headed out of the building to go to the corner market. This woman was standing out in front of the building with a cigarette, seemingly enjoying the evening breeze. "Oh my God, I wonder who was screaming," I said to her in a friendly way. She looked at me without making real eye contact. Did you hear it? That screaming?" I asked. "No," she said. Not at all? It was really loud," I added. She shook her head no, and I instantly knew it had been her. It would have been impossible not to hear. I felt bad for mentioning it. Over the last few years, we've heard many of their arguments and what had sounded like borderline domestic violence. As we got better at detecting what was being said, we started to get a sense that the male in the couple has a substance abuse problem, and that she gets very emotional, and potentially has a mood disorder, and clearly something that triggers her. We picked up that she called the police herself on occasion, and that one time he broke her computer monitor or laptop by hitting it. The pattern seems to be an incident about every 6 weeks, and often she would be saying, "Get away from me," and also just loud, frustrated expressions of rage. She's not petite and seems fairly robust, so we weren't as worried for her safety as we might have been. We would also hear him blow up, often mocking her, calling her dramatic, and other times expressing frustration that he feels like she's never satisfied and won't shut up. He began to say more and more when they were fighting, getting very loud, though still mostly unintelligible. At some points, I can't remember the context for the conversation, the super in our building implied that the guy has a drug problem and is unpredictable. However, sometimes we would see them outside in front of the building smoking together and talking to the other neighbors, so pretty normal seeming. At one point, she and I had a brief, pleasant chat about boots. This is getting a bit detailed, so I'll try to wrap it up. I generally just thought of them as troubled people who had nothing to do with me, my life, my husband, or dogs. I felt bad for them, and every once in a while considered knocking on their door or calling the police if it seemed any physical violence was going to happen. But it never got to that point. So here's a little twist. One morning, my husband came back from walking the dogs in the rain and told me, "I shut the basement door on that bike delivery guy." I was like, "What bike delivery guy?" "The one who's always fighting with his girlfriend and stands outside smoking all the time. He was smoking at the door of the trash room and had the door open, and I had to walk past him through the smoke. So I turned and just slowly closed the door while looking at him." Okay, this was probably not nice of my husband, and yet it was also rude of this guy to be smoking inside of a common area right in the doorway. Whatever. So about 2 weeks ago, my husband sent me a photo of a package that came for me and it had been doused in coffee. That's strange. Maybe someone bent over to pick up their own package and accidentally splashed our package with some coffee they were holding. Another afternoon, I was home alone, working, and things were quiet. Then I heard my doorknob turn. I thought it was probably my husband, so I just sat and waited for him to come in, but usually the dogs bark with joy when he comes home. They were totally quiet. The doorknob turned again and jiggled, then popped, the way it does when it's not catching the inside mechanism correctly. The dogs literally turned and looked at me, as if trying to decide how to react. My mind went blank as I just sat there. Then a few minutes passed and I texted my husband. He said it was probably workmen who had the wrong door. Then, yesterday afternoon, I opened the door to find a fresh heap of used cat litter and some substantial cat turds on our doormat. I almost stepped right on it. And what was weird is that early in the afternoon, I heard the door to the back stairway slam shut, which caused my dogs to bark like crazy, but they had not barked previously at that. So whoever left the cat poop, they had no issue with. Just noisy doors. So we got the super. He came up to chat with my husband, and it turns out there were a lot of incidents I was never told about. For example, once when I was not home, my husband was doing laundry and going in and out of the apartment about every 25 minutes. He came back upstairs at one point to find wet toilet paper all over our door, the floor, and on the walls of the hallway, as if someone had thrown it from further down the hall. There were other times that my husband had found things like a sandwich and just not mentioned it, so that I wouldn't be concerned. The super and the building manager had apparently had conversations with my husband about this before, and shared that this guy had had a problem with the people below him on the first floor, and above him on the third floor, as well as with us on the fourth, and that a couple of times related to the first floor interactions, cops had been called. So, this guy's a weirdo. He's in his mid to late 30s, at least, kind of slender, and bikes everywhere, so I have no idea if he is physically dangerous, weak, strong, who knows. We haven't seen or heard the girlfriend since after the 3rd week of the COVID lockdown, so we think she might be staying elsewhere. I'm not afraid, per se, but who knows what this guy wants or what his problem is. My husband thinks he has an issue with us because our dogs bark, and maybe that reaches the courtyard sometimes. It's ironic that the dogs have been quiet when he is outside our door, though, and that could be because we pass him often on walks when he is outside smoking, so they don't think he's a threat. Also ironic, he and his girlfriend have been insanely loud for years, so don't throw stones, you know. Or he could just hate me, or my husband, for whatever reason, and is too afraid to do anything normal about it. So here's what I need from you guys. I want to get a camera, but I really want it to be very hidden. If I get Ring or Nest, aren't those pretty obvious and obtrusive? I've even heard of rings getting stolen. I want something he can't see, to be sure he gets caught and gets evicted by violating the lease, because I don't want things to escalate between him and my husband. And I don't want him to come in our kitchen window and hurt the dogs or vandalize our stuff. On the one hand, I feel that he's not super dangerous. I mean, here's some cat poop and now I'm going to run down the back stairs doesn't really scream menacing to me. He may just be a passive-aggressive jerk who is too afraid to say, "Hey, keep your dogs quiet," or he may be some crazy person who is going to fixate on messing with us. They have lived in this building at least 6 years to our 8, and this stuff only started about 1.5 years ago, and is more frequent and obvious in the last few weeks, with the coffee and more cat litter. Am I overreacting? Or is this just something silly I shouldn't worry about? Can anyone recommend a very small camera setup that's not too expensive? I know that there are some that go into the peephole, but they seem like they stick out a bit. Anything else I should consider? Links or brand names would be appreciated. Thank you. Hi there, Vidith22 here. If you liked what you heard, be sure to check out my channel. I cover everything from succubus, werewolves, the deep web, to supernatural and cryptid stories. And with regular uploads, there is never a better time to join the following. See you all on the other side.